Brooke, you got your name on.
Okay,
Hey, Brooke, not the number anymore.
welcome everyone. Actually, I'm gonna. So we last time, or the last couple of times, we started talking about the Shulchan Aruch, which is one of the codes of Jewish law. And I suppose I should have popped up a chart, but I think we discussed this. But I'll just remind you. So you basically have many laws that are actually in the Bible. I mean, Jews count 613 commandments in the first five books alone in the Torah. And then I would say the Judaism that we practice is rabbinic Judaism, and the details of how to be a Jew post-biblical, namely without a temple in which to worship God, is basically in the Talmud. And there are a lot of legal discussions in the Talmud. There is both legal material that is called halachic material, and then there's also just lots of folk stories in the Talmud that's called Agadic material, Agadah, which is the same a word very much related to the Haggadah, which of course is the prayer book that we use that tells the story of the Exodus. We use it for Passover Seders. But, think, and again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the Talmud is not small. And of course, before Gutenberg, every copy would be handwritten. So you would not have a lot of copies of the Talmud around. And so you might have one in a large city or a few in a large city with senior rabbis, respected rabbis. And so there came a need for more concise codes of law that just deal with Jewish law, that don't have a lot of Agadic material, don't have all the discussion back and forth about how these laws are made. And so you have a number of legal codes in history. The best known of the early legal codes would be the Mishnah Torah by Moses Maimonides, also called Rambam, and it's called the Mishnah. The Mishnah Torah, sorry, not the Mishnah, not to be confused with the Mishnah. And I think I mentioned that it only took me 5 years to unconfuse myself about that particular subject. And then we have a very famous code, which is the Shulchan Aruch, which is in about 1500. And my own theory is that it became extremely important because it's the first code of Jewish law written after the discovery of the printing press. So it's Jewish law as it was in about 1500. And then, as you can imagine, throughout history, not just after these codes, but throughout Jewish history, questions arise, what lawyers would call case law. Not so much a theoretical issue, my ox gores your ox, and who's responsible, but an actual case. And the way this was always resolved is if you had a particular case and a question about Jewish law, you would go to your rabbi. And if it were pretty straightforward, your rabbi would tell you what to do. And if your rabbi couldn't figure it out, if it was a new issue or complicated issue, your rabbi would submit it to a very highly respected Jewish legal scholar. And you'll see a bunch of them quoted in the material we're going to look at tonight. And that rabbi would issue a ruling. So there's no it's not like the Congress or the Supreme Court or even any court, because it's just one rabbi making a ruling. And presumably that ruling would be accepted by people who respect the rulings of that rabbi. So as you can imagine, there'll be a difference between the Ashkenazi world and the Sephardic world and Chabad and other movements within Judaism. And that's the way it was and still is, actually, for hundreds of years. And along comes the Reform movement and the conservative movement, which have what I would describe as committees to resolve these issues. So in the Reform movement, there is something called the Responsa Committee of the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis. That's an organization of Reform rabbis. We have lots of committees. And there is a committee called the Responsa Committee, and people submit actual questions to the Responsa committee, and I have a long bookshelf of collected volumes of these, and they're also available online. If you actually just Google Reform Responsa, you will find a link to a site where you can search. You type in subjects, and you can find Responsa on those subjects. The conservative movement, which is actually more concerned, I would say, with Jewish law than is the Reform movement, has a couple of, I think it has two separate law committees, and operating in a somewhat similar way. So as a subject that we picked last time, we talked about this question of what does it mean to honor your parents? What does it mean to fear or be in awe of your parents? And we read a bunch of rulings in the Shulchan Aruch, and I thought I would take a look with you at some material in the Reform Responsa. And let me see if I can find our group again. There it is. Okay. Okay, I presume you can see this? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, good. So this is, there are a number of volumes, and they have different names. This one is American Reform Responsa. I'm actually not even sure. This is probably page numbers. Let me see if there are page numbers in here. No, probably page numbers in that volume. So it's, and the subject heading is responsibility of children to their parents. And this is 1982. You'll see that they are dated in different ways. So I think I'll read the question, and I'll ask if anybody wants to read or who would like to read the response on. So the question, which is called a she'olah in Hebrew, is a newly married couple wishes to know the extent of their responsibility toward their parents, according to the Reform view of halakha. What are the limits of the command, honor your father and your mother, beyond the obvious duty of care and support in infirmity, sickness, and old age? What is the boundary between independence and filial responsibility? And there's initials. This would be the initial, I think, of the rabbi that submitted the question. In some response, we actually see the name of the rabbi. Okay, so pretty clear and broad question. And so who would like to read? Volunteer to read?
I'll read a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Baruch.
I've read it in a little while. Excuse me. Answer. The commandment to honor your father is the fifth of the Decalogue. This, along with a statement, you shall each revere your father, or his father, and his mother, and keep my Shabbat. I am the Lord your God. Levi, what is that again?
That's Leviticus 19:3.
Leviticus
So these are biblical
19:3.
references.
And the biblical source of Kibud Va'im.
Sorry?
The mitzvah, however, may come to direct conflict with other mitzvahs, such as therefore a man leaves his father and the mother and clings to his wife, and so they may become one flesh.
Genesis 2:24.
2:24. Possibility of tension between these mitzvot has always existed. The mitzvah of a new house takes precedence without avoiding the other.
Without voiding the other.
Voiding the other.
So classic kind of issue in Jewish law is when you have two commandments that one can conceive of being on two different sides of the coin. Honor your father and your mother, or even revere or fear your father and your mother. But a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. Okay. Let's continue. The same kind.
Yes, the same kind of difficulty could arise with other mitzvot too. For example, that of settling in the land of Israel. The mitzvah of Aliyah took precedence. Meyer Rosenberg, Responsa, Volume 2, pages 120.
Yeah, don't worry about citing them.
There are other areas of potential conflict, such as choice of residence, occupation, etc. But we are principally concerned with the tension which may arise between marriage and filial devotion.
Okay, filial is a child, philos, child.
Possible conflict in these matters is somewhat clouded by the fact that the father had complete rights over his daughter until she reached puberty and became a
It's a bogeret.
Or get it.
And actually, I started doing some research on that. Basically, a young woman who has reached sexual maturity and is eligible to marry.
Although she was cautioned to try to fulfill her wishes. On the other hand, the father had no such power over his son, although at various times the father nevertheless controlled the marriage completely, as for example, in medieval Germany, see Moses Mintz, Responsa number 98. As children were likely to take matters into their own hands, various medieval synods
would be kind of, I guess, legal groups meeting to make decisions.
Okay, to control them through ordinances, freedmen.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about reading. But, you know, one of the things you can do here, and I don't know if you'll see it, let's just take Moses Mintz. If you highlight it and then right-click it, and it says search Google for him. I don't know, I presume you can see this, but it's basically was the chief rabbi of someplace from 1790 until his death. And of course, then you can look more at the article. So it is kind of interesting that although this is Reform Responsa, it is citing legal decisions, some of which will go back 1,000 years or more. It's one of the things I want to emphasize. It's not just we're Reform, we can do whatever we want. So Reform legal decisions are going to be made from the perspective of Jewish legal tradition, but we will see some places where they will go beyond or leave some traditions behind. Okay.
Well, I was reading a little bit before I was reading to myself before I started reading here earlier today, and it seems that the son has to take care of the father and the mother. Is that correct? Am I reading it right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it is pretty clear that all the sources agree, and I think we'll see this, that you are responsible to physically care for your parents.
Wow.
You're not obligated to love them. You're not actually, let me be more precise. You're obligated to see that their physical needs are met. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to meet them personally. You can arrange for them to be met with other caregivers.
I see. Okay.
Alan.
Are sons and daughters equally obligated?
Well, historically, one of the points of this article is clearly no, is that, and as it says here, until a daughter becomes mature, the father has complete rights over her, and the father had no power over the son.
That's the parent over the child. You said, I want to go back to the thing you said a few minutes ago, which was the obligation of the child to take care of the parent.
Mm-hmm.
So that
are you asking, is that equal?
Well, I understood your point about how it's worded to treat a young girl until she's matures and a boy differently, but I'm turning it around, and because you had something about the obligation of the children.
Yes, I think we're going to see that.
Okay.
I think that's addressed in this one.
Okay.
But actually, what they're pointing out here is the issue that was raised in the question is, what are the limits? What's the boundary between independence and filial responsibility? So what control do parents have over their children, which control would be suggested or reinforced by the commandment to honor and even fear your father and your mother? So that's why they're raising that issue as well.
In today's world, would the idea of a son and daughter to place their parent in a group home or in a home that takes care of them without the son and daughter really being there, somebody else, a caregiver for them. Is that what's coming up here also?
Yes, I would say that is that I think that would fulfill the obligation to honor your father and your mother. I mean, you would also respect them and visit them and do these things, but it actually gets sticky in cases where the parents are terrible people.
Right.
You know, you could have a father who has abused his children. And
Right.
so then what are the limits?
Right.
Well,
So that happened to me this summer, or this summer, around June or July, when my daughter couldn't take care of me by herself. She was working, so we hired a nurse to come in my home and take care of me, and that was really needed. I mean, that's something that was obviously needed.
Mhm.
I couldn't get along without that.
Yeah, I've had that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, and I think, you know, that we talk about many of us being in the sandwich generation, although as we get older, we're becoming one of the slices of bread,
Yes.
um, of being in a position where you are caring for both parents and children.
Right. That's exactly
And
right.
okay, so let's
Is
continue.
it the next one? This question arises a number of times in the responsive literature. In most instances, the authorities decide in favor of the children, as they alone could really decide what was proper for them. One of them put it beautifully and said that the couple was best able to judge the heavenly verdict in this matter. Others felt that marriage would be good only with these who truly loved one another. Therefore, no element of compulsion could be introduced.
Okay, and we have some responsa there.
Could you interpret that for me? I'm not quite getting it.
Yeah, so the issue is your parents tell you we want you to live in the house next door.
Yes.
Or they tell, you know, the child, I don't want you to marry this guy. Or, you know, marry this guy, but he shouldn't make you go to work. He's telling the daughter, you know, you should be able to. So the question is, to what degree are children obligated to obey their parents?
I see.
So the first comment here is the couple is best able to judge the heavenly verdict in this matter, which I interpret as reading, you know, what the younger couple is trying to decide is, what does God require of me? And so this one decisor is saying, you, the couple, are best able to judge that. And then others were saying that the couple is really bound to each other. Therefore, there's no compulsion applicable from parents to children. So there's going to be a range of decisions throughout history.
Okay.
Okay.
Where it says the authority of parents expressed, is that
yes.
where I'm at now? The authority of parents expressed only for its own sake, without need or frailty as a factor, was rejected in favor of those areas in which direct help should be provided for parents. This point of view was reflected frequently in the response of the Middle Ages. Salman de...
Yeah, I wouldn't even worry about citing them.
Okay.
We know that they're citing Middle Age response.
Point of view was later expressed in the Shlukim
Aruch.
Aruch B. Moses is...
Yeah, Aruch by, occasionally a space drops out, by Moses Aserlis. So,
okay.
So this is the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch.
And let me ask now, let's say somebody reads this in this particular book. What would they be doing as a end product of this statement?
We're talking about this paragraph here. What does it mean?
What would they be doing? What would be their responsibility?
Okay, so what I see here, okay, let me answer, is there's parents, and the question is, what authority do the parents have over this young couple?
Okay.
And if it's for its own sake, rather than I need you nearby because, we can't get up and down the stairs, or we can't feed ourselves and so on. So that level of authority was rejected, assuming in favor of those areas in which direct help should be provided. So I read this as saying, if a parent needs direct help,
Right.
that's necessary. That is obligatory on the children, either to provide it themselves or to make sure it is provided. But authority for its own sake, because I'm your father, that's why, is rejected once the couple marries, once the child starts its own household.
To me, I'll just speak for my own self. My mother was put in a home, boarding care home, because she could not take care of herself. Her husband, my father, had passed away, and my mother could not take care of herself in the house by herself, so she was placed in the boarding care home. And I don't know if I could live with myself if I didn't do something like that, because if I didn't, my mother would be out on the street. She wouldn't be living in any place that would be giving her like a home. That would be terrible. That's what I think. It would be very terrible.
Yes. Although, in our society, well, I mean, there are people homeless and out on the street.
There are.
So you're right.
There are.
Sometimes they are provided with care, but
Yes.
you've got to have someone at least looking out for them enough to get them into a place of care. So
Right,
yes.
exactly. Matters are seen somewhat differently in the case of a daughter, since a father might suffer financial loss through her actions. But many felt that daughters should be treated like sons and ruled for equality.
You don't have to read all the references.
Okay, there's too many to read anyway. Although this represented the majority view, another body of opinion ruled that the daughter must obey her father under all circumstances, even in the choice of a mate. Joseph Tarani followed the same line of reasoning, as did
Yechiel Weinberg.
Next name. At the very least, a daughter should listen to the advice of her parents and be urged to make her decision accordingly.
So clearly, if we go back in history, daughters are being treated differently than sons.
Yes.
And, I think it's worth reflecting that daughters, broadly speaking, I'm not even sure this is only Jewish, are the responsibility and property of parents, really the father, until
Right.
they marry, and then they become the property and the responsibility of the husband.
Of the husband, right?
In fact, we still have I would say in American culture, this is not part of Jewish culture. At a wedding, the father marches the daughter down the aisle, and the officiant, and I've been asked to do this, and I do it. I don't have any problem doing it. The officiant will say, "Who gives this daughter in marriage?" So what's really going on there, if you stop and think about it, is the father is giving the daughter to the groom. Father had responsibility, now the groom has responsibility.
I see.
Ironically, you may not like this any better, but in Jewish tradition, the groom is actually acquiring the bride. Not necessarily from her parents, although there is a bride price to be paid. I think the bride price actually goes into the household, though. I'm not sure. I really don't know how far back the idea of dowry to a parent goes.
An idea is that let's say a man and a woman decide that they're going to get married, and the mother is at home by herself, and the man and the woman agree that they're going to take care of the mother somehow. They're going to have to. It was in the marriage contract. They're going to have to. So the man and woman talk about this, and they decide, okay, well, mom's got to go someplace that she can that somebody can take care of her, because she can't be alone. And so the whole marriage is based on, for a while anyway, on the mother being taken care of, because the father and the wife, the husband and wife couldn't live without.
Yes. So let me just point out, I just want to quibble with your terminology.
Sure. Okay.
It's not in the marriage contract. It's in the Torah. It's a mitzvah.
Oh, I see.
Okay. The marriage isn't based on that. the children have an obligation, whether they are married or not married, they have an obligation to honor their father and mother. It's not a question of marriage or not marriage. It's not in the ketubah.
I see.
The relationship with the parents is not in the ketubah at all. So it's, I agree with you that we would probably feel the need to do it. But
Yes,
one of the things about commandments is we're obligated to do it, whether we feel the need to do it or not.
I see. I see. Wow. So the commandment overpowers our need to do something about our mother. Is that correct?
Our commandment obligates us to do something, whether or not we feel like doing it. That's
see.
what's meant by commandment. They're not suggestions.
So what if they don't want to do it? What if
And they're violating that commandment.
and what would happen to them?
Well, as we'll see, the next responsum is, can a community force children to care for their parents?
Okay.
That's actually the very next responsum that we will read.
Subsequent to marriage, the new wife owned her first allegiance to her husband. So honoring of parents became more the husband's duty than hers. The tension can be seen in some discussions. The tension can be seen in some sad discussions. Should a deceased daughter be buried with her father or her husband's future burial place, in her husband's future burial place? Either way was considered proper. Of course, if the wife and children if the wife had children, then she is definitely to be buried in her husband's plot rather than her father's. This shows that a family with children represented a much more independent unit.
A question I get from time to time, particularly in cases of remarriage, where you have a woman who's married or a man, either side. You have a couple and they are divorced.
Yes.
And now they are remarried. And the question is, with whom should they be buried?
The original, where so the children
Wow.
the children visit the parents together. They're gone.
So
So
it has nothing to do with visiting. The law is the spouse with whom you've had children. But it's
Right.
the same answer. But
Right.
it's not a question of visiting. And I would say in the Reform world, this is, or in a modern world, this isn't necessarily followed. And also, I'm not sure what you do if you've had two children with spouse number one and two children with spouse number two. I actually have no idea what the Jewish legal ruling would be on that.
Yeah.
So is this saying, is this, am I reading this right? Is this saying this is what a rabbi should say to the son or daughter of a parent? Is this what he should come up with as a understanding of what the son and daughter should do for their parents?
No, it's
Is it a ruling? Is this considered a ruling?
What we are reading now is a reform ruling.
A ruling.
And the first thing it's doing is going over the history of Jewish law on this subject.
I see. Okay.
And then we're going to see the reform conclusion.
Okay.
At the end.
In cases of conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who could no longer get along in the same household, that's a new one, isn't it? The husband was obligated to move his family out of the house. The rule was followed, especially if the financial issues at stake were considerable. In another instance, both Maimonides and the earlier Al-Fasi recommended that a neutral person try to adjust the matter. Let's see.
Sefer Hasidim took a different course.
Sefer Hasidim took a different. There is no split between the Hasidim and Tuk.
It's a typo.
Yeah, it's a typo. Sefer Hasidim did a different course and counseled that the young couple submit to the wishes of the parents, but the codes did not follow that path.
Okay, so we're seeing difference of opinion between different legal authorities. And by the way, you're not allowed to shop rabbis until you find the answer you like. You have to consult your rabbi who can consult his or her rabbi.
Actually happens between the husband and wife too. you're not living with my mother-in-law. No, you're not living with my mother-in-law. So
Yeah, so
that's a big issue.
that's the question. Yeah, the thing I like about Responsa is they are not theoretical discussions. They are actual issues that
I
occur.
see. Okay.
Okay, that's the medieval
That
text.
puts a different spin on it.
The medieval text encouraged
Yeah.
children.
Okay.
Uh, Go
Did
ahead,
somebody else
Baruch,
reading?
just finish this. We're almost done.
Okay. The medieval text encourages children to settle near their parents, but they were not expected to make unusual sacrifices in order to accomplish that. They should be close enough to look after their needs. On the other hand, if the father and son could not get along, it was better if they separated. Whoa.
All the
Said, on the other hand, if the father and son couldn't get along, it was better if they separated.
Yeah, meaning they shouldn't live in the same area.
I see.
Yeah. Sefer Hasidim, let's just see. I think this is pretty old. I love Google. Let's see. Yeah, 1217.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so you're talking about, if someone is just living in the next village, they're not going to see mom and dad so often.
Right. Was this, I need to understand this also.
Read one more paragraph.
Okay,
All the
where do I
proceeding.
start?
All the
of the proceeding?
Mhm.
Is that
Yes.
all of the preceding material makes it quite clear that everything was done to balance the interest of the older and younger generations. Normative Judaism encouraged freedom for the younger generation. The children remained responsible for the maintenance of their parents and were to look after their physical and psychological needs, but the children were not to be subjected to every whim and desire of the older generation. Through this, the full personal development of the younger generation was constantly encouraged.
So that's the bottom line of this responsum. And there aren't footnotes here. This is an older one. So basically, if a couple came to me with an issue about, my parents are insisting that we live here and I become a dentist, and I really want to become a professional football player,
Right.
and live in St. Louis. These are real questions that arise. And, I mean, in many cases, a lot of my congregants couldn't care a whit about what Jewish law says on the subject.
Right.
But
Right.
if they do, then I would go to the responsa literature. I would come up with a responsum like this, and that would guide me.
Okay, there's one thing that really hits me right here in my chest. One sentence can change the whole concept of what's going on here. One sentence. And the sentence is, through this, the full personal development of the younger generation was constantly encouraged. But you go back a little further, and one sentence could change the whole meaning of what's going on here, because the rabbi would have to use that sentence to make a determination. And shouldn't those sentences be changed after a while? Shouldn't there be some kind of upgrade or
No, so what I would say in U.S. law,
yeah,
a court is making a ruling in an
Yeah.
area which is a new area of law.
right.
What the court would do would be to consult other rulings and precedent, and lawyers would cite other cases,
I see. Okay.
and then the judge would make a ruling.
Right. I
So
see.
no one sentence. We're not reading Torah here.
Right.
These aren't
right.
the words of God.
I see.
So,
Okay.
so if Walter Jacob, who died, was kind of the Reform rabbi who really took an interest in Jewish law, and so he sought to provide a system of providing legal support to Reform rabbis who are presented with cases.
Okay.
And
That's interesting, because now I understand. When in America, we use the Constitution, 1776. We use the Constitution to help us make some rulings about how we behave. Just like this is making.
So to be precise,
Yeah.
I will be more precise. We don't read the Constitution often in and of itself isn't sufficiently specific to tell us what to do.
Right, there you go.
And
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
1789, not 1776, the little detail.
Okay, that's all right.
But so, for example, the Constitution will say Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion.
Okay,
Period. That doesn't say separation of church and state. It
Right.
doesn't say you can't post the Ten Commandments. It
Right.
doesn't say you can't have prayer in school.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So basically what you have is over the hundreds of years, you have particular cases that come up through the courts, and the courts decide what the Constitution means.
I see.
Okay?
Okay, that's right. That's exactly right.
Right. And some of us would argue that the courts go far afield on the original meaning of the Constitution. I mean, the best one is gun control. There's an amendment to the
Right.
Constitution, that says that because we need militias, the right to bear arms shall not be abridged. And so the courts will say, does that mean I have the right to own an AK-47 to keep in my house?
You know where I'm getting lost in all this is how long ago my reading is taking us back, how many thousands of years, and now the Constitution is hundreds of years, and we have to sort of combine those two. To me, you have to combine those two. How can you use?
The answer is you ask your rabbi.
Yeah,
That really is the answer.
yeah.
I'm going to put up another responsum. This one is actually pretty short. I think I'm going to read it. And then there are two that I'll mention the two other responsa. We won't get to them tonight, but they're actually very interesting because of the subject matter, not only the issue of obedience due to parents.
Okay.
So this is I don't know what the date on this one is, but I think it's a contemporary reform responsa. Let's see. This one was American. So this is a later text.
It almost sounds
Children support of parents. So the question that arises is, can a community force children to support their parents? Can the community refuse to support them on the basis of the children's obligation? Okay, so here we go. Rabbi Khan from Houston, Texas. And I don't know if at the bottom there's, June 1982.
Oh,
so
okay.
so first, understand the issue. The Torah says you're to provide care for your parents.
Right.
Now the question is, suppose you have a child that doesn't provide care for the parents. Is there anything that the community can do?
I see. But the Torah doesn't tell the parents in what way they have to provide support. There's no saying that you got to do this.
In the Talmud, there are some examples, but not in the Torah. So the basis for the support of parents by their children is the fifth commandment: honor your father and your mother, from Exodus. This has been taken as one of the main sources for most aspects of the child-parent relationship. The question of financial support of parents by their children led to a division of opinion between the scholars of the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmud. I think you probably know this. There were two Talmuds, one written in Babylonia and one written in the Holy Land. The authorities of the Palestinian Talmud, the one in the Holy Land is called the Palestinian Talmud. In English, the Yerushalmi, or the Jerusalem Talmud in Hebrew, felt that their children had to support the parents, and of course were obligated to honor them through their personal service and devotion. This could be compelled by the Jewish community. And then just so you know, so this Jerusalem Talmud Kiddushin 71b. The Babylonian authorities, in one long discussion, felt that although honor and devotion was due to parents from their children, financial support was debatable. Arguments were presented on both sides, but ultimately the decision freed the son from any obligation to support his parents. Emphasis was placed on personal service rather than on financial obligation. That service was to be rendered by his son, even if it led to considerable financial loss. Such service could be forced by the community. Other discussions indicate that sons were forced to support their parents financially. These are more Talmudic references. There are also numerous stories in the Midrash which emphasize this. This was the position ultimately taken by tradition. The debate among later authorities does not deal with the need to support parents, which is taken for granted, but whether this could be compelled. The answer in most instances turned out to be positive, as this is a charitable duty and the community may compel charitable contributions. On the other hand, scholars felt uneasy about compelling devotion and respect. So I'll just point out that in Judaism, charity isn't giving of the heart. Charity is tithing, 10%. So it's not sort of what you feel like giving. It's what is required to fulfill Jewish law. And so a community could compel the giving of charity. We'll see how in a moment. Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg indicated that charity must begin with close relatives. Parents are first, then brothers or sisters. Other relatives follow, and the total stranger becomes last. So we have his responsa. Let me just move up. It was normal in medieval Europe to support family members from the tithe allocated to the poor. So again, you're obligated to tithe 10%. Now, part of that 10% could be supporting relatives. Your primary obligation is to your parents, and then more and more distant relatives. The community could go to a considerable length to force a son in this direction. Salman ben Aderet, for example, suggested that the synagogue be closed to a son and he be publicly shamed until he supported his father, yet he should not be placed under a ban. In this case, there was some doubt about the economic deprivation of the father. Somewhat similarly, David ben Zimri felt that children could be compelled to support their parents in a manner appropriate to the financial status of the children. A decision akin to this was rendered much later by Moses Sofer. It further indicated that anything which a son possessed must be placed at the disposal of the parents. There are, of course, many other responsa which deal with the specialized problems in which there is controversy between parents and children over other matters which cloud the nature of these obligations. We may therefore conclude that the community may go to considerable length to force children to support their parents. The traditional authorities naturally mentioned only the responsibility of sons. We would broaden that to include all children. If the community does not succeed in obtaining such support as the enforcing powers of a modern community are limited, then the community itself is obligated to support the parents. And I think this is also Walter Jacobs, probably. So to summarize, there are cases where you can basically publicly shame people by pointing out that they are not fulfilling the mitzvah of supporting their parents.
Yes.
And you can deny them, entry into the synagogue for prayer and so on. Chris.
Yeah, I guess I'm still a little confused. Well, first of all, we're reading summaries and not the actual responsa. So
No, these are the actual response. Well, this is the responsa, the Reform Responsa. So basically, this is where Walter Jacobs is coming out, and this is his conclusion, reviewing legal decisions made, for the last 1,000 years. But what we're reading is the actual responsum singular, to a question raised.
But so in all the references, it'll say responsa number 64 or something. So am I using a different term for that? Like that's the original responsum, and then now we're reading.
Okay, so for example, let's just look at Meir of Rothenburg. Uh, 1215 to 1293. So 900 years ago, this question was raised, and Walter Jacob, who wrote this responsum, was aware of what Meir of Rothenburg said 900 years ago. So basically, in all of these decisions, what you're going to see is the responsa committee And it's actually kind of a challenge to teach because later responsum go on for 12 and 13 pages. So it doesn't lend itself to the format that we have. It makes very interesting reading. So what you're going to see is the decisor here, probably Walter Jacob, referencing what exists in the Bible and the Torah, and legal codes like the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch, and then other responsa that touch on the same subject, and then he is going to come up with his decision that the community can go to considerable length to force children to support their parents. He's not being specific, but he's basically giving the rabbi and that congregation guidance.
So you wouldn't,
sorry?
you wouldn't have like a rabbi before this, would they have been looking at all those original responsum from, 900 years ago and making their decisions based on that, or like?
Well, what you have is Rabbi Kahn of Houston, Texas, was approached by someone in the community and asked this question of the responsa committee. Rabbi Kahn, if he's an ordinary, run-of-the-mill Reform rabbi, probably doesn't have access to these responsum and not even aware that they exist. I mean, I'm not aware of these responsa. So you want to have, you want to have a committee of Reform rabbis who are very knowledgeable about where to look up these kinds of things and make their decision based upon it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Alan and then Henry. You have your hand up.
Oh, my question had to do with is there a counterpart, Ms. Esponza, for the conservative movement, or
Yeah,
any,
there's I have a couple of volumes of that too. So
do they treat the parent thing differently?
I have no idea. I haven't looked at it.
Thank you.
My guess is they treat it similarly, but because they're going to be working with the same history. What we're going to see, and once Henry comments, I want to just give you a glimpse into the two things we can discuss next week. Henry.
Yeah, just a quick question. Does this also apply to in-laws? Like father-in-law, mother-in-law, and so forth.
Well, presumably the responsibility of honoring a parent, if it's your in-law, is that of your spouse. Now, the question I guess you're asking is, if your spouse has died, does that responsibility still continue?
Wow.
And I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It is a good question. So I want to tease you a little bit. We're almost at 8 o'clock. The next responsum, I think, is a really interesting one. And this one now is, this year is 5785. So this is the second responsum handled by the responsa committee in 5766. So it's about 20 years old. And we actually do have the full name of the rabbi submitting the question. So you have an interesting issue of a man who is approaching death, has instructed that his body be cremated, and his children are uncomfortable with it. So so they're asking whether the children should obey the mitzvah to honor the wishes of their parent or to honor Jewish law. And it's kind of a long responsum. I'm just kind of scrolling down, but it's actually quite interesting, not only from the issue of obeying parents, but for the issue of what does Judaism say about cremation, and actually as what does Judaism say about cremation, and what does Reform Judaism say about cremation, both of which are very interesting subjects. And then the next one also is an interesting one, and one. So on the subject of cremation, something that Reform rabbis have to come to grips with all the time. And then the next one is a parent is instructing a child not to say Kaddish. And this is actually the parent of a convert who is not reconciled with his child's conversion to Judaism and may in fact even be anti-Semitic, and definitely doesn't want the child to say Kaddish at his funeral. So does it, and So again, you have conflicting mitzvot. You have the mitzvah of honoring your parent, and you have the mitzvah of, and by mitzvah I mean commandment. I don't mean a good deed. You have the mitzvah, sorry, of saying Kaddish for a parent. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, but we'll look at those two next time. Baruch.
Yeah, I have one comment to make. What we're reading to me is beautiful, because this happened how many years? 900 years ago. Were other cultures also involved in figuring this out about who's going to take care of the parents?
So I don't know about other cultures. What I do know is a centerpiece of Judaism
Yes.
is what we do rather than what we believe.
Right. Okay. That
So
makes a lot of sense.
it's not about your feelings. It's
Right.
about your obligations under Jewish law.
And
And
who
and
gave that law to the Jewish people? Who gave that law to the Jewish
God.
people? So God is a merciful person. He's a wonderful person to give all this
And a jealous
over.
God. So we're gonna get into this.
Yeah.
I mean, it also says I am a jealous God, and I am a warrior God. We're actually going to get into it in some of these responsa. God in Judaism is not only the God of love and caring. It's also the God of justice.
Right.
Okay. I would say you see in Christian thought, there is a sense that the God of the Old Testament, as they would describe it, is a God of vengeance and not necessarily love, where Jesus is all about love. Now, I would say that's not true, but I would say it is also true that God is a God of justice and also a God of compassion.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not, I mean, I know that there's kind of a tendency to think of God only as warm and fuzzy and loving. You know, you read in the Torah on Saturday mornings, we're reading in Leviticus, the punishment for adultery is death. The punishment of, I think even, well, I mean, I don't remember all the details, but so in Jewish law, there's a lot of harsh Jewish law, which the rabbis toned down by using clever logic. But still, Judaism is a religion of law. I would say primarily about what you are supposed to do more than what you are supposed to believe. And I like that, but I also acknowledge that it's not all warm and fuzzy.
No, God is God is infinite. There's no way to understand what he does. There's no way
We don't have to understand what he does.
there's no mortal way. There's a mortal person doesn't have that kind of
Yeah,
ability.
but Baruch, you have to understand, what does God want me to do?
Exactly. That's the point I was getting to.
Okay.
God doesn't, he has so many ways of interacting with us, so many thousands, I mean, infinite number of ways.
And therefore, your point is?
What he chooses to do is a decision that's made by him to other people who are trying to make sense out of what's going on in the world. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yes. Yes. So I would say traditional Judaism is a religion of law.
Right.
And the word mitzvah means commandment.
Right.
And in the Reform world, we are presented with the irony, some would say heresy, that we feel free to ignore some of these laws. And I'll be very specific. Kashrut. Most Reform Jews I know don't keep strictly kosher. Laws of menstrual purity. Most Reform Jews I know don't keep physically separate from their wives for half the month. And then the wife goes to a mikveh. So again, it reminds me of one of my favorite phrases from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who said, I don't care which movement you're a part of as long as you're ashamed of it. Because every Jewish movement has serious flaws and problems.
I see. Okay.
But you're right. It's not just how we feel about it, or acknowledging that God is beyond all understanding. We have to address the issue of what is it I am supposed to do. The way I often describe this, you probably heard me say this before. Suppose we were all Orthodox Jews and we were getting together this Thursday for Thanksgiving. And before the meal, we're going to have a little discussion of Torah. And our discussion is going to be centered on the theological question of what is the nature of the afterlife. And one person believes in heaven and Gehenna. Another person believes there are 3 levels of heaven. Another person believes there are 7 levels of heaven. Another person believes in physical resurrection, the day of the coming of the Messiah. Another person believes in reincarnation, like the Kabbalists and Chabad, that we're born again, and they can't come to an agreement. Is that a problem?
It would be a problem if the belief was so strong that they wouldn't take any other answer but what they have.
No, but they can't come to an agreement. Is it a problem that you and I have different beliefs about
No, it's
the
not a
coming of the
problem.
Messiah? No.
I can understand it.
Now it's time to eat, and we can't agree on whether this turkey is kosher.
Yes,
Is that a problem?
yes.
Yeah, we can't eat.
You
So
can't
in
eat, can't do anything
Judaism,
with it.
I'm sorry?
You can't use the plates. Maybe the plates aren't
No,
washed.
I'm not talking about why. I'm just saying Jews can have disagreements about matters of belief and the nature of God and the nature of God's love and the afterlife and all kinds of things. You can believe whatever you want to believe.
Right.
Jews have to agree on what Jewish law is and how it binds
I
it.
see. That's very nice. I like that idea very
And
much.
that is not true of, I would say, of most of the movements of Christianity and
See,
other
that's
religions.
what I'm getting.
It's
That's
actually
what I'm
more
getting.
true in Islam than it is in
Yeah,
Christianity.
that's the nut, the meat of the nut that I was trying to get to. I wonder if other cultures have the same ideas that Jews do about lots of things. You know,
Well, you can go ask them, but but you can't. But I don't know the answer to that one. Okay, so we are coming. Actually, I have another Zoom call. I have a couple I'm counseling for their wedding. Alan, yeah, we have time. Go ahead.
Just I put in since Baruch made the broad statement, what does God expect of us? So that always triggers the Micah statement, which you can see in the chat, verses chapter 6, verse 8, 6 to 8. So I'm trying to reconcile your turkey discussion about kashrut, which doesn't seem to be a big deal if you think of the Micah teaching, right?
No, it's not a big deal if you summarize all of Jewish law under the Micah teaching.
I liked, and we tend to like that kind of orientation, so that we don't get stuck in the mud too much on.
So to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Does that mean you can have ham for Thanksgiving?
If it could, yeah.
It could, but we don't deal with coulds. So in traditional Judaism, the answer is no. Micah is a great statement, and it might even be quoted when we're trying to make a legal decision about the importance of mercy and justice and humility. But the question is this turkey kosher? That's going to be resolved by other very specific rulings. You may not care whether the turkey is kosher, I'm with you. I'm
Reform, yeah, but Orthodoxy has to reconcile this Micah statement with all those other rules that I might not follow, right? They do reconcile it, right? They feel obligated to follow it, but it doesn't seem like anyway.
So the question is whether Micah's statement is used in making Jewish law, and I don't know the answer to that. My guess is love mercy, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. I'm not sure how much specific legal direction that gives you. And I'm not.
As a Reformed Jew, it gives me exactly what I need.
Yeah, but because you're not necessarily respecting Jewish law as a Reformed Jew.
Focuses on how I treat other people, which doesn't, right. I realize, I know what you're saying about Jewish law.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we meeting on Wednesday this week?
We are not meeting on Wednesday this week, nor the following Wednesday because I'm traveling, but we are meeting Mondays. I'm not traveling on various Mondays. So I will wish you all a good evening and a happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
And as I pointed out when we were studying on Shabbat, that the Hebrew word for thanks and the Hebrew word for turkey are the same. Just saying.
Okay.
It's
So,
meant
No
to be.
ham.
so have
No
a
ham.
wonderful Thanksgiving.
No ham on Thanksgiving. Okay.
No
See you
ham. No ham.
later.